sure you guys have not heard what I'm about to show you anywhere else. I can almost promise you this. Let me blow this all the way up. Let me break this down. What you guys are seeing here. Shout out to Coach Anderson. Said interesting. So when Kelsey Mitchell scored over 30, we are 2-4 as a team. And when Caitlin does it, we are 3-1. That's because Caitlin is a floor raiser, but Stephanie White decided to build the offense for Kelsey more than Caitlin's strength, where the F is to pick and roll.
We need to have a very serious, very uncomfortable, and long overdue conversation about what is actually taking place inside the Indiana Fever organization. Because what happened in Dallas and what has been quietly festering beneath the surface of this entire season is no longer just a minor tactical disagreement or an ordinary mid-season slump. It is the deafening sound of a catastrophic collision between individual stat chasing and winning basketball. For months, we have watched the mainstream media construct a narrative of convenience. We have watched analysts look at raw box scores, see gaudy scoring totals, and immediately conclude that individual offensive production inherently translates into competitive success. We have been told to celebrate high-volume scoring nights as proof of dominance while completely ignoring the structural wreckage left behind on the floor. But when you pull back the curtain, strip away the highlight reels, and subject this team to cold, hard forensic analysis, the data does not merely suggest a problem, it screams an indictment. Let us look directly at the numbers that should be studied by every coach, general manager, and analyst in professional basketball as a masterclass in how individual volume can actively sabotage team success. When Kelsey Mitchell scores 30 or more points in a game this season, the Indiana Fever have a record of 2 wins and 4 losses.
Every player with more than 30 points a game this season and their teams recorded in those games. A'ja Wilson, 11 games plus 30, their team 8-3. Marina Marbury, she had 6, her team 4-2. Kelsey Mitchell, have 6, and the Fever is 2-4. Caitlin Clark has 4, and the Fever is 3-1. Breanna Stewart skipped over her. They 4-0 when she scored over 30. Kalia Copper, 4. Her team 2-2, and everybody else is undefeated when they score over 30. So why is it the Fever record is worse when Kelsey Mitchell scores over 30? Scores over 30. What is this here? Caitlin Clark 2026 splits versus current top 8 teams versus bottom 7 teams through August 20th through the 26th. Stat gains 18. Her bottom is 15. Record is 8-10. 12-3.
Let that sink in. Let it marinate. 2 wins and 4 losses. In a league where 30-point performances are supposed to represent the pinnacle of individual dominance, Indiana is losing 2/3 of the games where their secondary guard catches fire. Now, let us place that jarring reality into the broader context of the entire WNBA to understand just how unprecedented and alarming that statistic truly is. Across the league, when elite offensive players reach the 30-point plateau, their teams win at an overwhelmingly dominant rate. When A'ja Wilson scores 30 or more points for the Las Vegas Aces across 11 games, her team holds a record of 8 wins and 3 losses. When Breanna Stewart erupts for 30-plus points, the New York Liberty are a perfect, undefeated 4-0. When Marina Mabrey drops 30 or more, her team sits at 4 wins and 2 losses. When Kalia Copper puts up 30-plus, her squad is 2-2. In fact, virtually every other premier scorer across the WNBA landscape boasts a winning, if not entirely unblemished record when they cross that threshold. Every single star in this league converts 30-point nights into victories, except for one. Kelsey Mitchell is the lone, glaring, undeniable outlier in the entire sport. She is the only high-volume scorer in professional basketball whose 30-point explosions directly correlate to a losing record for her franchise. And now, contrast that with the franchise cornerstone. When Caitlin Clark scores 30 or more points, the Indiana Fever are 3 wins and 1 loss. That is not a statistical anomaly. That is not random noise over a small sample size. That is an absolute, undeniable mathematical reflection of two completely incompatible basketball realities operating on the same roster. And it exposes the massive philosophical failure of head coach Stephanie White. There is a fundamental difference between a floor-raising playmaker and a volume-scoring isolation guard. Caitlin Clark is a generational floor raiser. When Clark scores 30 points, those points are the organic byproduct of a high-octane, space and pace, transition-heavy offensive ecosystem. Clark's 30 points come off hit-ahead passes that unlock early offense, high pick-and-roll reads from 35 feet out that force two defenders over the level of the screen, and deep relocation threes that bend the entire geometry of the floor. When Clark has the basketball, the entire team eats. The ball flies from side to side, role players get wide-open corner attempts, bigs receive effortless drop-offs at the rim, and the team's collective offensive rating reaches historic efficiency. When Kelsey Mitchell scores 30 points, the exact opposite occurs. The offense does not expand, it shrinks. The possession becomes an agonizing exercise in watching one player dribble the leather off the basketball for 18 seconds, while four teammates stand completely frozen on the perimeter. The ball stops moving, the pace slows to a grinding halt. The transition lanes evaporate into thin air, and most critically, Caitlin Clark is systematically removed from the game. Caitlin Clark is a rhythm-dependent superstar. She is not a spot-up, stationary floor spacer who can stand in the weak side corner for 4 consecutive possessions, watch someone else run a disjointed isolation set, and then suddenly knock down a contested 40-footer when the ball is kicked to her with 3 seconds on the shot clock. You simply cannot take the most electric, transformative playmaker the women's game has ever seen, strip her of decision-making authority, turn her into an off-ball decoy, and then act surprised when she looks out of sync, when she forces difficult looks, and when her shooting percentages dip. When Kelsey Mitchell goes into what can only be described as her hero ball mode, she is not merely taking shots. She is actively suffocating the rhythm of the player who makes this entire franchise commercially and competitively relevant. You can see the visible frustration on Clark's face when she is frozen out of the offense. When Clark is denied the ball, she cannot find her flow. When she cannot find her flow, the logo threes do not fall. And when the logo threes do not fall, her overall statistical output takes a massive artificial hit that the box score watchers immediately use to criticize her performance, completely blind to the fact that she was never given the offensive oxygen required to breathe. And that is precisely what played out in the loss against the Dallas Wings. Dallas entered that matchup with a clear, aggressive, and disciplined defensive strategy. Pack the paint, wall off the rim, bring relentless physical ball pressure against Clark, and dare the Indiana Fever to beat them in the half-court with secondary creation. The Wings knew that if they could slow down the game and force Indiana into half-court execution, Stephanie White's broken offensive structure would do the rest of the work for them. And White walked straight into the trap. Instead of running continuous high pick-and-roll actions with Clark at the top of the key, an action that completely obliterates defensive schemes when executed with pace, the coaching staff allowed the offense to devolve into stagnant, predictable hub motion sets. Where was the pick-and-roll? Where was the spatial manipulation that unlocks Clark's passing vision? It was nowhere to be found. And that brings us directly to the front court breakdown, specifically involving Aaliyah Boston. We have to have an honest, uncomfortable conversation about Aaliyah Boston's performance and her role in this offensive breakdown. In that Dallas game, there was a specific sequence that is circulated across the basketball world, and it encapsulates the entire crisis facing this roster. On a routine half-court possession, Clark brought the ball across the timeline, expecting a basic, fundamental ball screen from Boston to create separation against on-ball pressure. Instead of stepping up, establishing a wide base, and setting a solid, physical screen on Odyssey Sims, Boston completely ghosted the action. She stopped short, stepped completely out of the play, and allowed Sims to blow right past her unhindered, resulting in Clark getting blindsided and violently tackled to the hardwood. Look at the film. That is not a missed assignment by a rookie who doesn't know the playbook. Aaliyah Boston is an elite, highly decorated professional. She understands the spatial geometry of a basketball court. To completely abandon a screen, leave your primary playmaker totally unprotected against a crashing defender, and force a catastrophic turnover or a potential injury is an inexcusable breakdown of fundamental basketball responsibility. When you have a franchise point guard who is absorbing historic amounts of physical punishment every single night, the bare minimum requirement of your starting center is to set bone-crushing screens, open up clean driving lanes, and punish defenders who try to overplay the passing lanes. Instead, we saw possession after possession where Boston refused to initiate contact, called for the ball at the elbow, and demanded to operate as a stationary hub. When Boston functions as a perimeter hub, calling for the ball 20 feet from the basket, it creates a cascading failure across the entire lineup. Boston is a 6'5" former #1 overall pick. Her value to this franchise is anchored in her ability to establish deep post position, execute fundamentally sound drop-step finishes, crash the offensive glass, and draw interior defensive gravity toward the rim. When she drifts out to the three-point line to act as a secondary distributor, Indiana's rebounding presence completely disappears. Against Dallas, the Fever were utterly dismantled on the glass, getting out-rebounded 33-23. They surrendered offensive rebound after offensive rebound because their starting center was hovering near the top of the key instead of battling in the paint. Boston finished that contest with 7 assists, but those 7 assists came at the direct expense of Indiana's physical presence around the rim and resulted in a double-digit rebounding deficit. Look at the analytical splits. When you take a holistic approach and examine Indiana's performance against the top teams in this league versus the bottom-tier squads, the divide becomes glaringly obvious. Against disciplined, elite defenses that understand how to take away primary options, an offense built around individual isolation and stationary post hubs completely collapses. A floor-raising point guard like Clark thrives on generating high-efficiency team shots, but when the scheme forces her into contested, rhythmless attempts while secondary scorers hunt their numbers, the drop-off against elite opposition is immediate, severe, and predictable. And this leads directly into the cultural reality that fans and observers have documented all season: the noticeable shift in on-court chemistry. Last season, we saw visible joy. We saw organic camaraderie, shared celebrations, and a natural chemistry that translated into infectious on-court flow. This season, that dynamic has noticeably deteriorated. On the floor, Clark's most seamless, instinctive, and selfless partnerships are visibly with players like Lexi Hull and Sophie Cunningham, athletes who understand how to run the floor hard in transition, cut with purpose, relocate along the arc, and play with absolute selflessness. When Clark shares the court with players who embrace rapid ball movement and understand spatial awareness, the offense functions like a symphony. When the lineup reverts to slow-developing isolation sets designed to feed individual scoring streaks, the body language changes, the energy deflates, and the entire structure grinds to a halt. There is a reason you see Clark thriving in transition with players who run the floor, while half-court possessions involving stationary hub sets look completely out of sync. Stephanie White's schematic choices are actively cultivating this division. Instead of establishing a rigid, non-negotiable identity built entirely around Caitlin Clark's transcendent playmaking, White has attempted to appease multiple conflicting agendas. She has designed offensive packages that cater to Kelsey Mitchell's desire for heavy isolation volume while simultaneously trying to transform Aaliyah Boston into an unconventional perimeter facilitator. The result is an absolute disaster. You cannot serve two masters on a basketball court. You cannot run a fast-break, transition-oriented pace-and-space offense while simultaneously accommodating an isolation-heavy, ball-stopping scoring guard who requires 30 seconds of dribbling to find a shot. The two philosophies cannot coexist. When you attempt to blend them, you get an offense that looks passable against bottom-tier teams who cannot defend in space, but completely falls apart when a disciplined team like Dallas closes the driving lanes and forces structured half-court execution. Every single time Kelsey Mitchell goes off for 30-plus points, the offense is hijacked, the floor spacing collapses, the pace drops, and the Indiana Fever lose. Every single time Caitlin Clark goes off for 30-plus points, the offense explodes, the ball moves, the pace accelerates, and the Indiana Fever win. How much more evidence does the coaching staff need? How many more games must be sacrificed at the altar of hero ball before the front office steps in and demands accountability? Let us be crystal clear about what the priority must be moving forward. Caitlin Clark is the engine of the Indiana Fever. She is the reason the arenas are packed to the rafters, the reason the television ratings have shattered every metric in league history, and the reason this franchise has an opportunity to compete for championships over the next decade. When you possess a generational talent of that magnitude, your entire playbook, your entire rotation strategy, and your entire roster hierarchy must be built around maximizing her strengths. That means running continuous high pick and rolls that force opposing bigs to make impossible choices 30 feet from the basket. That means requiring your starting center to set hard, punishing screens, roll hard to the rim, and dominate the interior glass. That means demanding that your secondary guards play off the ball, make quick decisions within 2 seconds of touching the leather, and relocate along the arc to provide maximum spacing. And that means benching anyone who refuses to buy into that collective vision in favor of hunting personal scoring streaks. The numbers do not lie. 2 wins and 4 losses when Kelsey Mitchell scores 30 points. 3 wins and 1 loss when Caitlin Clark scores 30 points. That is the entire story in 2 simple statistics. One style of play elevates the entire team, creates easy scoring opportunities for every player on the floor, and produces winning basketball. The other style inflates individual scoring averages, dismantles team rhythm, marginalizes the franchise superstar, and leads directly to embarrassing losses against teams Indiana should comfortably defeat. The Indiana Fever front office and coaching staff are standing at a critical crossroads. They can continue to indulge broken schemes, ignore the glaring statistical evidence, and allow internal dynamics to undermine their generational cornerstone. Or they can finally wake up, take complete command of this team's identity, eliminate the hero ball tendencies, and hand the keys entirely to Caitlin Clark. The blueprint for success is sitting right in front of them. The math has already been done. It is time for Stephanie White and the Indiana Fever to look at the numbers, accept the reality of what the data is screaming, and commit to the only brand of basketball that will ever bring a championship to Indiana.